Think about this. Right now, we are going back in time. Not to something extremely distant, but to a time when the world worked in a completely different way from what we know today. We are going to the Middle Ages, but not the glamorous side filled with kings, knights, and wars, more like the background, a place nobody really looks at. In fact, a place most people never even think about. Imagine a village. No stone houses, no modern roads, no electricity, no plumbing. Only land, mud, cold, wind, and people living in this environment. But here's the interesting part. These people are not just people living a hard life. They are actually the foundation of an entire system. Think about morning. For us today, morning means an alarm, a phone, coffee, maybe rushing to work. But for a medieval peasant, morning is not that at all. Morning simply means realizing the day has begun. If the sun rises, you get up. If it doesn't, you still have to get up because there is work, animals, fields, things that must be done. And here is the most interesting part. Their life never really stops. Today we have weekends, holidays, days off. They didn't have these concepts because nature doesn't allow it. The land doesn't say, I'm not working today. The animals don't say, I don't need food today. If you are alive, you work. If you work, you survive. Now let's go deeper into the village. Think about their houses. For us, a house means comfort, safety, warmth. But back then, a house was more like a survival space. Usually just one room. Maybe not even two. People slept, ate, and sometimes even kept animals in the same structure. Because heat mattered. If you lose heat, you die. So even animals were kept close to the house. Think about a peasant family. Father, mother, children. But children were not just kids playing games like today. They were part of the workforce. From a very young age, they went to the fields, carried water, took care of animals. Because there was no other option. The system was built in a way where everyone had to contribute. And here you can see something interesting about human adaptation. When we look at this life today, we say this is extremely hard. But for them, this was just life. They didn't know any other model of living. No one could sit and think, I want an easier life, because there was nothing to compare it with. Now let's talk about one of the most important elements of that time, land. Land was everything, truly everything. Think of it like money, like power, like life itself. But peasants usually didn't own land. It belonged to a lord, a noble. The peasant worked the land, but did not own it. They had to give a portion of what they produced. They paid taxes, gave goods, and sometimes worked for free. So the system was basically this. You work, we take, and you survive as best as you can. But interestingly, this system also created order. Everyone knew their place. Everyone knew what they were supposed to do. And life continued in that structure. Now let's talk about food. Today, when we think about food, we think about variety, taste, restaurants, delivery. Back then, none of that existed. Food was very simple. Bread, soup, some vegetables. Meat was extremely rare. For most peasants, meat was something special, maybe only a few times a year. And here's something interesting. People weren't constantly hungry in a dramatic sense, but they ate the same things over and over again. Still, they survived. Because the goal wasn't pleasure. The goal was energy. Food meant survival. Even water was not always safe. Today we just open the tap and drink water, but back then drinking water could be dangerous. That's why people often drank beer or lee. Now let's look at daily work. A peasant's day never really ended. It started in the morning and continued until night. But there was no such thing as work is done, because work followed the rhythm of nature. There was planting season, harvest season, winter preparation. Everything was a cycle. And within this cycle, humans were not exactly fighting nature, but living in constant adjustment to it. Still, it was a harsh adjustment. If the weather was bad, everything could be lost. A bad harvest year could mean starvation. One bad year could change everything. Now let's talk about religion, because it was extremely important in that period. Religion was not just belief. It was also an explanation system. Why is there sickness? God. Why is there a storm? God. Why is the harvest bad? God. Everything had meaning, but that meaning was outside human control. The church was at the center of this system. It was not only religious, but also social. It told people what was right and wrong. It also gave people something to hold on to, because the world was harsh and unpredictable. But despite all of this, peasant life was not completely dark. People still had fun. They joked, danced, had weddings, and celebrated festivals. Harvest time, for example, was almost like a big celebration because it meant another year survived. Think about that. Today we celebrate when we achieve goals. They celebrated simply surviving another year without starvation. Different level, but similar emotion. Wars were also part of this life. But peasants usually didn't fight wars directly. They experienced the effects of them. When war happened, fields were destroyed, taxes increased, and life became harder. So even if war felt distant, it still reached their daily life. Disease was also very harsh. Medicine was not developed. Even a simple infection could be deadly. Epidemics could wipe out entire villages. And most of the time, people didn't even know why it was happening. It just happened. But despite all of this, life continued. And that might be the most interesting part. No matter how hard conditions were, people always found a way. They worked, lived, formed families, and raised children. And when you think about it, medieval peasant life feels very distant from us. But the core things are the same: survival, work, protecting loved ones, building a future. The only difference is how extreme and direct everything was. And maybe the strangest part is this: the people who don't even have names in history books actually made up around 90% of that world. Kings, wars, castles, they represent only a small fraction. The real world was the world of peasants. And maybe this is what we need to understand. History is not only the story of great people, it is also the story of those who were never named. Because without them, no kingdom, no city, and no system could have survived. And this is what the hidden life of the Middle Ages really was. Silent, harsh, simple, but incredibly real. There is still something we haven't fully understood about this world. Because when we talk about medieval peasants, it's easy to focus only on survival, on hardship, on work, on struggle. But there is another layer beneath all of that. A deeper layer. A layer about how they actually experience time. For us, time is divided. Minutes, hours, days, weeks, years. Everything is measured, tracked, and controlled. But for a medieval peasant, time is not something you look at. Time is something you feel. The rising sun, the position of shadows, the cold in the air, the sound of animals waking up. This is how time speaks to them. There is no schedule, no clock telling you, now you should be here. Instead, life is guided by patterns. And these patterns are so strong, they become instinct. You don't think about when to wake up. You wake up because waking up is necessary. And because of this, their perception of life is completely different from ours. A year is not a number. A year is a cycle of survival, a cycle of planting, waiting, harvesting, surviving winter, and starting again. But inside this cycle, something very important happens. Human relationships become everything. Because there is no modern system supporting you. No government safety net. No hospitals in the modern sense. No guarantees. So the only real security you have is other people. Your family, your neighbors, your village. And this creates something interesting. A strong sense of dependency. If your neighbor fails, it affects you. If your harvest is bad, it affects the whole village. If someone is sick, the entire community feels it. Everything is connected. Nothing is truly individual. And because of this, even though life is harsh, there is a strong sense of unity. People help each other not because of kindness alone, but because survival requires it. Now imagine winter. Winter is not just a season. Winter is a test of preparation, of endue. If you did not prepare enough food, winter does not forgive you. If your storage is weak, winter exposes it. If your health is weak, winter breaks it. So during the warmer months, life becomes intense. Every hour matters. Every harvest matters. Every decision matters. Because everything is building toward one moment: winter. And when winter arrives, the world changes completely. The fields disappear under snow. Work slows down. But survival does not stop. You still need firewood. You still need food. You still need warmth. And in those moments, the house becomes the entire world. One small space, holding an entire family. Sometimes animals, sometimes smoke filling the air, sometimes silence so deep it feels heavy. But even then, life does not become empty. Because this is where storytelling begins. This is where people talk, remember, share, pass time together. Stories become entertainment. History becomes memory. And memory becomes identity. Because there is no internet, no books for everyone, no screens. Words become the most powerful tool. A story told by one person can survive generations. And this is how culture survives in a world that has nothing permanent. Now let's go back to something important. We often imagine medieval life as static, like nothing changes. But that is not true. Even in this simple world, change exists. Villages grow, tools slowly improve, farming techniques evolve, people learn from each other. It is slow, very slow, but it is still progress.